Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we had the privilege of chatting with author Lydia Kang, whose newest book is Star Wars Cataclysm, the adult novel conclusion to Phase 2 of the High Republic. And man, what a book, and what a way to close out Phase 2 from the Del Rey side of things. And we were just so excited to talk to her to celebrate the special occasion on this book birthday of all things, Sarah.
I feel like with a title, Cataclysm, you know, some stuff is going to go down. And indeed, it did.
All roads lead to Dalna.
All roads lead to Dalna.
Which is so
through
funny.
My tears.
So funny because originally you thought Dalna would not be.
Oh my God.
Are
you bringing this up right now? Are you bringing this up right
are.
now on this intro right now?
But it was just very funny because Lydia used that phrase specifically in our interview, and I had to laugh because you love a losing bet, Sarah.
I feel like I'm being attacked on this podcast right now. What did I do to deserve this? I lost one bet one time.
I know.
And
it's just one time's enough sometimes.
I have lost other bets. I do love the losing bet. But
speaking of getting attacked, the Jedi versus the path of the open hand.
That was that's right.
Lots of things are coming together in this book. A cataclysm, you could say.
Wow.
But we were so excited to chat with Lydia. Some of her other work includes the book Toxic and The November Girl, which was the winner of the 2018 Nebraska Book Award for Best YA Fiction. And she also writes some other nonfiction and poetry as well. And she's also a practicing physician.
She's really cool.
She's kind of a superhero, I think.
Honestly.
Like writer by night, physician by day. I mean, she's saving all sorts of lives, both through the written word and through medicine, which you gotta praise it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we had a really great conversation with her about this book and about her journey with Star Wars and writing Star Wars. And we will warn you up front that we do not go into spoiler heavy content, but there are definitely allusions to spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, you might want to hold off if you don't want any idea of what's going on in this book or want to go in not having any allusions to spoilers. But if you do decide to pause this episode, read the book and come back, we look forward to you to your ears when you return, I guess.
Yes, definitely what Sarah said. And this is a really great conversation, especially ahead of Star Wars Celebration. So listen to this on your plane ride. If you're going, listen to it at home, on your sofa, buckle in. It's going to be a great one. So without further ado, let's jump over to our interview with Lydia Kang. Lydia, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you as a first time here on the show.
Thank you. Thanks. It's really cool to be here.
So at the time of this episode coming out, Cataclysm is on bookshelves. People may be getting it at their local store or possibly at Celebration. You're listening to this episode on the way to the convention center. How does it feel to have that book out in people's hands to read?
Oh my gosh, it's going to be a little overwhelming. I think I feel like we've been working on this book for some time, and it's just been worked on. And, you know, to be able to actually hold the final copies has been really strange for me. And it's going to be even stranger knowing that people are going to have these cracked open and reading, and like during Celebration, you know, it's going to be coming out. So some people are literally going to be cracking that book open as they like walk around during Celebration. So it's going to be pretty amazing, pretty unusual, I think, of an experience as far as a release date is concerned.
It's like one giant weekend long book event, really, for book fans, having all the books there and seeing people, you know, lining up to buy special editions and all that stuff. That should be really excited. I'm so excited for you.
I know. I can't wait to see the special editions and like the gold, yellow pages and the blue pages is going to be so pretty. And I don't know. I have a feeling like my brain is just going to be exploding like multiple times when I'm there. So
that feels like that's the vibe when it comes to Star Wars, when it comes to the High Republic, when it comes to Star Wars Celebration. So embrace it, you know?
Okay. All right. So if I look completely weird and slack-jawed throughout my whole time there, you guys will all understand why.
You and 70,000 other people.
all looking the same way, honestly.
Oh, clueless. Wow. Clueless and surviving off hot dogs and potato chips. We're all just hanging in there.
Awesome. We shall all be doing it together.
It's fascinating because, like, Light of the Jedi was supposed to come out at Celebration, and obviously pandemic happened and that got delayed. So your book is the only one to come out the week of a celebration for the High
Oh my
Republic,
gosh.
which is
Yeah, that's
so
probably,
cool for you.
yes.
So
Right.
very
Totally. Oh.
fascinating. So you'll have new memories as a Star Wars fan, but like kind of keeping with that line of thinking, like your earliest memories as a Star Wars fan. Let's rewind a little. What are some of your earliest memories as a Star Wars fan, like growing up with it? And what inspired you about like the first time you saw those movies or maybe got into some books or TV shows?
So I think I've told this before, but like I saw Star Wars A New Hope when it first came out in movie theaters in 1977. So I was a very young child, and I don't remember a ton about the movie, but I do remember Luke's final run with the yellow goggles on and just being extremely stressed out when I was watching it. And I remember a lot of like, the fear of seeing like, when the other movies came out, like certain like scenes just like really stuck out in my mind as a kid. But I would watch them over and over again because they would be on all the time on television, like during the holidays. And so it was like this holiday thing. It was sort of like there was eating turkey at Thanksgiving and there was Star Wars. And at Christmas, it was like there was opening presents and there was Star Wars. So it was just like constantly part of my childhood, all these really special occasions, and Star Wars was constantly in the background. And after 4, 5, and 6 came out, the Ewoks got really hot, for young kids. And so there was like a show, there was like a cartoon, and I would watch those all the time. I kind of had forgotten about them for a long time. And then I was like, I used to watch Ewok cartoons constantly when I was a kid. And I really, really loved them, like Wicket and all them. So yeah, I mean, I think it was just sort of part of my childhood growing up. I never delved super deeply into a lot of the world outside of the movies, and so I wasn't like reading a ton of books or comics or things like that. And yet it was still like all over the place. Like, we would have like pillowcases that were Star Wars, and we would have like action figures around all the time. And my having children myself, like our house has been filled with like Lego related Star Wars stuff, like constantly. And so I just feel like it's sort of always been there, and there's always been a deep love. Like my husband's car is a white car with black accents, and it looks like a stormtrooper, and it's named TK421. So it's like things like that. Just they're small. They sort of show our love, and people who aren't at that slightly deeper level of fandom like just don't get it. And but we've just been living there for some time. We love it.
You're like, and yes, my droid spatula is just a part of my life, you know?
No, exactly. We have like multiple pairs of chopsticks, and they are all lightsaber chopsticks.
Perfect. No
And you can't
notes.
put them in the dishwasher. You have to hand wash them because they're very, whatever. But they're very slippery. I don't like to use them. They're very special. But yeah, like just things like that. Like it's just like in your life, just part of your life. It's a normal part of your life. And so that's sort of where I was before I ever became a Star Wars writer.
I love the Ewoks shout out. It's the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. There's going to be a lot of Ewok merch at Celebration, let me tell you.
I
So
know.
get ready.
I'm curious to see if there's going to be Ewoks in the anthology, and like who's going to write about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm
Very
so
exciting.
excited to find
Yeah.
out.
Totally
Yes.
excited.
Kind of, looking at your background and your work, we found out you went to medical school and are a doctor as well as being a writer. These are both very demanding professions that require a lot of time and focus. And I would love to know, what interested you about the medical field and going down that path, and also being a writer and going down that path, and how you balance those kind of two avenues or two parts of your life.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird. I'm constantly switching back and forth. So like this morning I was seeing patients, and this afternoon I'm like, on Twitter doing Star Wars stuff, and then like I'm calling patients, and so they really mix up quite a bit. And I did not expect to be a writer when I was younger. I knew once I got to college, I kind of knew that I wanted to be a doctor. My dad's a psychiatrist and my brother's a hand surgeon. So there's like, there are doctors in my family. But I guess I always sort of had an itch to write stuff, but I didn't try in any sort of earnest way until I was like nearing 40. And I had already been a practicing physician for like 10 years. And I just decided to give it a shot. It's a very long story, but to suffice it to say, I kind of started with writing nonfiction like essays about patient care and poetry actually, and then dove into young adult novels. And I got my first book deal. It came out in 2013. And then after that, I branched into like historical mysteries for adults. And then I also branched into like history of medicine stuff with quackery. And then somewhere along the way, I got involved in Star Wars. And I still sometimes look at like, the books that I've written, and I'm just sort of like, this is very weird. I just write so many strange things that don't seem to be related to each other. But I don't think that really answered your question. It just, they happened in not in tandem, like one after the other. The writing sort of came alongside my work as a physician because I just wanted to do it so badly. And people always ask me, how do you do both at the same time? And the very easy answer to that is that I'm a part-time physician. And I work like a couple days a week, and the other days of the week I'm writing. And I can compartmentalize pretty well, and I can be really efficient if I need to be. Sometimes I'm extremely not efficient. But I guess I'm really good with deadlines. Like, you want me to get something done and you give me a deadline, like I will do it very quickly. So somehow I managed to, I guess all the work of being a physician and sort of being in time management stuff has managed to work out in my writing world. But yeah, here I am. I have like the weirdest career ever. But
I think it's kind of incredible though, because you kind of get to do the creative aspect for it and write for a lot of different audiences as well, but also do practice medicine and help people in that way as well. And they're both healing things, if you ask me, storytelling and medicine. So it
yeah,
makes sense.
The High Republic is medicinal, that's for sure.
it
It's
is totally medicinal.
gotten
I think like
me
Star Wars
through
is medicinal. Like,
sometimes.
yeah, totally. I totally agree. And you're right. It does, like, I feel like it serves humanity for in different reasons. Um, and uh and for good. So yeah, I think they've both helped me tolerate some of the stressors that happen in each profession. So anybody who works in healthcare knows that it's difficult at times, and it's like you want to bang your head against the wall on occasion. And working in publishing is also really stressful, but in its own way. And they somehow soothe each other because the stressor is completely different. And when you get kind of frustrated with one world, you have the other world to sort of like calm you down, and vice versa. So it kind of works out for me for
That
now.
makes sense to me. Honestly, it does. Kind of being able to switch gears a little bit. Do you, just kind of a follow-up question? You've talked about how you've written for young adult audiences in a nonfiction setting. Do you have a favorite audience to write for, or an audience that you kind of are wanting to go back to writing for?
Um, I don't think I necessarily have a favorite audience. I do notice that sometimes after I've been writing nonfiction for a while, I crave writing fiction. Like, I crave being able to just make shit up. Ooh, am I allowed to say? Am I allowed to cuss? Oh, okay.
You are.
I just some, like, because sometimes you just don't want to deal with, like, you're beholden to facts and figures and putting it together in a way that's like, entertaining. Sometimes you just want to just make things up, and you want to be the god of your universe, if that makes sense. I'm just going to kill this person off. I'm going to create this person over here. I'm going to rip this plot out. And you can be, do it with like aggressive glee, but it's your world, so you can do it. Within nonfiction, there are more parameters that you have to sort of stick to. So I find that I swing back and forth between like the calmness and the straightforwardness of writing nonfiction, and then like the sort of freedom of writing fiction.
Yeah, and Star Wars is an incredible sandbox to world build in, and shout out to your first story there, Right Hand Man, and the anthology for Empire Strikes Back. I feel like that is one we don't talk enough about, but it all kind of makes sense. Your brother's a hand surgeon, you're in medicine, like it makes sense why you specifically would write that story, and it's such a great one. I love it. But now getting to join the High Republic initiative, it is sort of a new world that you can play within and aren't necessarily constrained to some of the confines. And I use confines lightly, just like, in the canon with the 9 movies, it's like a whole new sandbox, 150 years before phase 1, which is 350 years before Phantom Menace. So like, what was it like to join that initiative, knowing you can make your mark on Star Wars, but also like set this new tone? And was there anything going into it that really helped to set you up for that type of success within it?
Yeah, it's funny because it's like it's sort of a sandbox within a sandbox, right? So a lot of the rules of the world still stand, but things are different because it is like the sort of prequel. Um, I think that what really helped was I had known about, the High Republic, and and phase 1 was familiar to me, but I kind of dug up quite a bit deeper into phase 1 and really got a feel for the voices and the characters and like how it was different but the same in some ways, to a lot of the original canon. And I think that sort of freed me up to say, like, I think I can maybe do this. But honestly, it was I was kind of terrified to write this book, and I was pretty terrified throughout a good chunk of the process until I had a lot of words down and I realized I think I'm doing it and I think I'm, you know, doing a good job. But maybe it's because I'm a newer author in the Star Wars world compared to some of these authors who've been doing this time and time again and have many, many books under their belt. I for me, I just felt like I was holding, such a high torch for like, this has to be done well. I have to do a good job. The fans expect good work, like premium work. And if I don't kick ass and do my absolute best, they will see it and they deserve the best. And so I was just constantly like, it was stressful, but I would say it was like good stress. It was like happy stress. I'm like, I would sort of swing between like, oh my God, I'm writing Star Wars, to like get back to work and just get this scene down and stick the landing and make this count, like on every emotional level that you need it to. And so, it was really just sort of going back to some of the skills that I have and plotting and storytelling and stuff like that, that were the things that allowed me to do what I needed to do. But yeah, it was like I've never had an experience like this. And I might not ever have it again, because again, I've done it with, I've worked with all these people and they've been fantastic. And the book is out, and it's just going to be, I'm never going to be able to replicate the experience that I had over the course of, the writing process. And it's just been amazing. I'm never
Mhm.
going to forget it.
Well, I can assure you that this book whips a whole lot of ass. It's great. It's so good. And going from the anthology right to the High Republic is definitely a big ask, but like, you were picked for a reason, and the book shows that. It shows exactly why you were the right choice for this novel.
Thank you. That's very, very kind. I don't I think it probably helps that I have written many, many other things. Um,
Yes, absolutely.
but yeah, it was a little scary. I remember like when they asked me, and I was just like, I'm like, did you email the right person? Like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?
You're like, it says Lydia in the email, but like there are other Lydias.
Yes, I know. I know. And I was sort of like, can I really do this? And I was like asking friends who I trust, friends who are in the publishing business. And they were just like, yes, Lydia, you can do this. And I'm just like, I don't know where you get your optimism from, but okay, I'll just go with it. So yeah, yeah. So that's sort of like, that was sort of how I was feeling. But it took a while for me to start to feel like I'm doing right by this story. And I think I did a good job. But it was I mean, I hope I did a good job. I hope the readers think I did a good job. But it's yeah, it was pretty nerve-wracking for sure.
You mentioned kind of diving into phase 1 of the High Republic, and also in the acknowledgments. I always love to pull up the acknowledgments in a conversation. You mentioned you give a special shout out to Zoraida Cordova and Kevin Scott for conversing with you for, quote, endless hours. Why were those particular discussions so valuable for you? And what kind of, guidance, advice, or just conversations did you have that helped you to deliver the kind of story in this book?
Right. So, it's interesting. So Zoraida has written for Star Wars before. And so this wasn't her first novel, but it was her first time writing in the High Republic. And so I could talk to her as somebody who was sort of like newish, to the group, but also knew enough about the process that it wasn't, totally unknown. Whereas Cavan is sort of like worn in like an old shoe and has sort of been here for a while and is one of the original, story architects and stuff like that. So I got different advice from both of them during the process and different times of support. But when on a plotting level, Zoraida and I had to talk a lot because I was writing the direct sequel. And so in some ways, it was really important for me to it was hard for me to get started unless I knew exactly how like Convergence was going to end and where the characters were emotionally, at that time and that sort of thing. So, and things would change, over time. Sometimes things would get altered and I would have to alter things and vice versa. And Cav and I, you know, his writing Path of Vengeance, like there are overlapping temporal things happening in that book with Cataclysm. And so for that reason, we had a lot of discussions, like many, many discussions. But he's so experienced and he has done this so many times. So he's really helpful in just sort of guiding me and just basically calming me down all the time. When I needed to be calmed down, I would be like texting him and be like, what about this? And he'd be like, we're going to do that. And so I'm not going to get too much into the nitty gritty and, lift the veil of sort of what happens behind the scenes. Suffice it to say, they are both lovely people to work with. I would work with them again in a heartbeat. And it made the process just that much more fun. Honestly, they're great people.
Or while Cataclysm is like overlapping a bit with Path of Vengeance, it's also picking up a lot of pieces, like you said, from Zoraida's book and also springboarding off the Battle of Jeddah. And it's really trying to close out this phase in a way and tie up some of those loose ends and give you some of those answers in a really like satisfying, explosive, emotional way. So like going into it, what sort of like how was your initial approach kind of attacking that sort of challenge, knowing like, the pressure's on, like I gotta kind of wrap things up and also deliver a story that has a lot of meaning and a lot of heart. Like how do you
Right.
like approach a task like that?
Well, I think as with any book that I write, especially ones that have like twists and lots of thrills and is meant to be a page turner, I have to know how the book ends. So knowing what was going to have to happen towards the end anchored me so that I could just that was sort of like my light in the dark. So I could just always head towards that light. And, all roads lead to Dalna. And so that was just something that I had to sort of live by, knowing that I had to weave all these threads so that they came to the same place. And so things were really, confusing and explosive and difficult. So, they always like we always joke in publishing, like, you torture your characters and you just make it so hard for them. And I feel kind of bad. I feel kind of bad, but it was sort of worth it. I knew this was going to be. There's a reason why the book is called Cataclysm. It's there are harsh moments in this book, and it's war, and war is not pretty. And as much as I like tried to put in like little spots of levity in the books, the bottom line is that a lot of Star Wars is about war and conflict and pain and suffering and trying to find the good in all of that darkness. And so yeah, that's sort of what was constantly on my mind as I was making sure it worked. And it was hard. I had like these storyboards where I had like post-it notes. I can actually show you, except that we're on a podcast. So I have these like storyboards where I have these like color-coded post-it notes with like the different scenes of all the different characters, and they're like doing this sort of like all over the place. And then making sure that the colors were showing up at the appropriate amounts of time so that you weren't away from a character too long and forgot all about them before they sort of came back in. So it's a much more complicated book than anything that I have ever written before because of so many intermingling storylines and making sure that I was being as mean as possible throughout the story to my characters.
Yeah,
Not letting them
there are a
talk
couple
and things
parts
like
in there.
that.
I was like, oh yeah, she definitely talked to Kevin about this book a little bit.
I'll never
All love to
forget
Kevin.
the
Yeah,
series of
all
emotions
love.
I go through every time I read one of these books and I pick up a new one and I'm like, okay, I guess I'm ready to suffer. Like,
Yeah, I was like, we're safe, guys. Kevin's book doesn't come out till May. Oh, wait, Lydia's hitting some of the emotions in this one, but I love
pain.
it. I love it.
But that's, that's what we love so much about these stories, right? If it was easy and fun all the time, it's not exactly going to be Star Wars. It's not going to, you know, have all those different things that we love about it so much, with pain comes pleasure, unfortunately, in storytelling. And that's just something that we have to live by when it comes to these books, unfortunately.
I love that. I'm gonna start saying that about Star Wars. With pain comes pleasure. I love that. I love that so much.
So you mentioned, all roads lead to Dalna, and alas, they do. But also, kind of, there's a really interesting conversation that's pretty explicitly mentioned by name, like proper noun. The mothers in Star Wars is a really kind of interesting topic that we've talked about, I think, as a fandom over especially the past handful of years. But there's the mother herself in the Path of the Open Hand. Besides having a pet monster that feeds off the Force, just low key things, what do you think makes the mother such a terrifying foe compared to someone like we had in Phase One with Marchion Ro? And what makes her story so compelling to tell?
Right. I think that, she is such a fascinating character because she has all of the sheen of the things that you would associate with a mother. She appears to be benevolent. She's leading a group. She's trying to protect them. She's trying to sort of grow her brood and make them successful and survive. Right. Um, but there is a sort of like dark, cold heart to her that is, she's a survivor. And you can be a survivor and still have a good heart, and then sometimes you can be a survivor and it means not having one. And so it was interesting to talk and explore those two entities, like what makes you, where do you gather your strength from, right? And I think it's a constant theme in so much of Star Wars, which is that, like, can you live in the gray zone? Do you live in one zone versus the other, as far as, like, benevolence, or always doing good, or heading to the dark side because you have this ulterior motive? um Exploring that is fun, and the characters are interesting and complicated, for all of those different reasons, because sometimes you don't know exactly where they live in that spectrum. As you're reading, you're trying to figure it out, because what's what we all want to do. We want to put somebody in a box. Luke is good, Darth Vader is bad. And as I think a lot of fans have found, is a lot of the new content that's coming out, like in Andor and stuff like that, like, the ambiguity of goodness and badness is fascinating. And it makes you just not want to stop learning more about them, because it refuses to let you put somebody solidly in the boxes.
I think that, and then also just it really clearly kind of reflects our own world. People are complicated, just as people in the everyday world. So, yeah, I really love that point of view for sure.
Somebody you did not put in a box in this book was Keon Greylark. I was like very pleasantly surprised by that. I did not expect to get as much of a perspective from her as we did. And motherhood is not something that is explored in Star Wars as much as like Sarah and I would love for it to be, but you really honed in on that, and the Greylark family as a unit that is splintered, and diving into some of the ambiguity of her character as well, like living in these two worlds, trying to balance the two, like being a mother over being the chancellor of the whole republic. What intrigued you about her character, and did being a mother of three yourself help to influence the way that you wrote that character or even sympathized with her?
Sure. I made a conscious choice to make her a much bigger part of the book. It kind of made sense because we knew, Axel was gonna show up in Cataclysm, and we had to sort of tell his story arc. But so much of his arc um, reflects upon how he grew up and how he developed, right? And so much of development happens with what sort of parental figures are in your life, or were they in your life. And yeah, I've been a working mom since I started having kids, and I've always felt this real difficult tension between career and family. And it's a tension that I think is unduly placed on women more than are certain, parental figures versus others. And so I wanted to completely exploit my own personal sort of, frustrations with it, and just stick it all on Kyung Greylark and be like, let's see what happens when, what is more important, the fate of the galaxy or the fate of the one family member that you love so much that you would be like, what are you really willing to do for love? And she asks that question constantly, you know um what would you do? And there are certain, she draws certain lines, these are some of the things that I will not do, but these are some of the things I will do. And it was incredibly satisfying to pit her against the mother in the Path of the Open Hand, who is called the mother, and what the mother is willing to do for the people that look to her as their own sort of savior or their own family. So I had a blast writing about Kyung. It was very easy for me to write about the things that went through her head, about the choices that she made. They came very naturally. I was like, oh, she's going to do this, she's going to do that. And the great part was that everybody has a conception of what a certain person is like based on, what happened in um, Convergence, and how a person sort of acts and how cold they might be or how warm they might be or whatever. And I just like to mess with that. I like to sort of challenge readers and flip that on their heads and be like, well, okay, you think they're going to do this, we're going to have them do that. You think they're going to do that, we're going to, like, completely change things around. So it was maybe one of the most, if not the most satisfying thing that I wrote, or character that I wrote in this book. And it may not get a whole lot of airplay and people may not talk about it, but I really enjoyed writing her character. It was near and dear to my heart.
This is the signal to the reader that we definitely should be talking about Kyung in this story and in our conversations about this story. She's not a character to miss.
No,
Absolutely
not
not.
at all.
She
Not at
rolls
all.
up her sleeves in this book, and there are some parts where I laughed just because of some conversations, and I got very emotional, and some of the friendships that Kyung has and are explored in this book, whether it be with Yoda or with Chancellor Malo. Like, there's just so much to her character, and I love that you talk about characters doing something maybe you wouldn't expect from them. And somebody else who I think of is Axel, her son, right? Speaking of the Greylarks. And I was going through some of your past interviews, and there was one from 2018. You were talking with Ahmed, and you said that, like, in your earliest days of writing, you always wanted to, quote, write about what it felt like to help someone who was broken. And that obviously is influenced with your background in medicine. But I immediately thought of Gela and Axel, and the way in Convergence, Gela tells him, I don't want to fix you. Right. But she
Yeah.
continues to give him second chances repeatedly in this book, despite her inner instincts telling her not to. So, like,
Mhm.
between those two characters, what was the most important thing for you to consider when developing that relationship? Because it does feel very authentic. It feels very raw.
Right. Yeah, they were a difficult duo to write, because I knew that Axel's a little bit like a pinball machine ball. Like, he just goes zing, and he, like, something hits him and he reacts. Something hits him and he reacts, and he's just constantly zinging all over the place, making terrible choices. And the question was, what is he like? What is he going to hit, or what is going to finally stop him in his tracks and make him finally grow up, honestly, and sort of do the adult thing, and realize that he can't keep running and pinging and all that kind of stuff. So I had to balance that with Gela, which is, Gela at the end of Convergence is like, I'm going to become a way seeker. She has found this sort of centering of herself, despite the fact that, she guessed wrong when it came to Axel, like on occasions. And there is that sort of hurt of making this profound mistake, which had huge consequences on Irem, right? And so there's this whole, like, is Gela ever going to trust herself again when it comes to him? There's something about Axel that just throws her off kilter, and like all her good sense, all the calmness that she can get from, harnessing the force and trying to be, the best Jedi that she can be, it is constantly thrown off kilter in the presence of Axel. And so I wanted to play with that and make sure that they were throwing each other off, but I also wanted their relationship to develop and to get beyond where they were in Convergence, which was hard. So yeah, they were difficult. I had to rewrite a lot of that. I had to really rethink and make sure that um things weren't coming out as simple as them just like barking at each other all the time, which is really fun to hear Axel and Gela just fight. Like it's great fun, but it doesn't always forward the story or forward their own journey. And so yeah, I could do a book of them just like fighting constantly to the end, and it would be fun. But they wouldn't be better people at the end of it. So
Yes, I love hearing that. You're so hit the nail on the head. Like it's not always just fighting, which is what I loved about it, right? It's complex, it's messy. You don't know how to feel about these two. In some ways you do, in some ways you don't, and that's what makes you want to keep turning the page to figure out what's gonna go on with them. And I got to ask too, like, what was your reaction to seeing Axel Greylark in all of his glory, his beautiful glory on the cover of your book? I
oh
don't
my
know if
god,
when you saw it
it
at New
was
York Comic Con, was that the first time seeing it?
so and I had seen, early versions of it, so I kind of knew what was sort of coming, but actually getting it like in my hands and looking at that beautiful bad boy face and being like, this guy, well, guy looks like, like my hot cousin, like if I had a hot cousin. So I'm sort of like, oh my God, I could be related to him, except I would give him such a hard time for being such a bad boy. But like, I have to say, like, just a huge shout out to, they put these beautiful touches on his coat that are like kind of Korean coded. And I was like, I didn't ask them to do that. They just knew, like, because it's just absolutely beautifully done. And yeah, so I kind of got a tear in my eye when I saw it. I was like, I can't believe I'm looking at this. There's an Asian boy on a Star Wars book, and I wrote it. So it feels remarkable in a way that no other book cover has ever felt, for sure. And it feels kind of historic. It's wonderful.
I think it is so special. And I think it's also really cool when you can see the two covers together and see the way that these stories are playing together.
I know, it's beautiful.
Obsessed.
They are just so beautifully matched, and gosh, that is just wonderfully, wonderfully done. I can't wait to also get my hands on like, more of like the books with all the artwork from the High Republic, because every time I get like the first one that came out in the fall, I was like just pouring through it because it's just beautiful. It's all
Those are
beautiful.
those are some of my favorite books, like that Star Wars in any form publishes, because I'm like, oh, pretty, gorgeous art that brings these characters like from the books or from the storyboards to life in a new
Yeah.
way. Always so cool. So I'm with right there with you and enjoying that.
Oh,
I
so
feel
sweet.
like if there were like alternate covers of these, if we were to get like a second set of covers, we have our main kind of pairing of characters of Axel and Gela who play off each other, but there's also the story of Ziri and Fontu, and
Mhm.
within the story of Aronal. And without spoiling too much, there's a character who says it's the most dangerous thing in the world is to love someone. And it's a fascinating the idea to think about because in Convergence, love is the thing that is at that point trying to stave off the war, or trying to fix things. And um, Ziri and Fontu kind of that they have that holding true for them, that realness of that connection and wanting to build something. Was the resiliency of love like an important idea for you to explore with these two characters? And what ways did you try to convey the complicated relationship of love and this arrangement and the war? There's a lot happening.
Yeah, yeah, there is a lot happening. And I feel like sometimes I'm jealous because Zoraida got to do all of this fun stuff of them sort of hating each other in the beginning, and then they start to fall in love. But it's really complicated because their world, each of their planets hate each other, and but they're starting to fall for each other and deciding to join in this union together. All I kept thinking was like, marriage is going to be hard for these guys. Like, it's
True,
going to be
true.
hard. And I know for reasons it's going to be extremely hard in Cataclysm. And that's what I decided I was going to address. Like, I was going to make it difficult for them because I feel like our culture, American culture sort of celebrates the falling in love and like get the ring on the finger and like, oh, the wedding is beautiful and the dress and stuff like that. And it's everything that happens after that's marriage. It's not just the ceremony and stuff like that. And it's not pretty sometimes. It's difficult. It's a ton of work. And I did not want to downplay that and make things easy for them. I wanted them to start to or immediately have issues with, oh, we're married, so we always have to have the same opinion. Oh, we're married, we always have to be on the same page. And life is not that simple, especially when the two planets you come to hate each other and, have been at this never-ending war forever. So yeah, I wanted to tackle that a little bit. I wanted to make things a little bit difficult for them. Um, but I also wanted to show that they have a lot of hope because that's what happens when you're in a new relationship is there, despite the difficulty, there is the hope that, that this union, that this vulnerability is going to pay out in spades. And so that's what you sort of cling to as you sort of read along and wonder what's going to happen with these guys.
Hope is so quintessentially Star Wars, and I would say for anybody who is maybe concerned, like that the end of the Battle of Jeddah is not very positive. It's not very optimistic, right? So in some ways, you could think like, like everything Ziri and Fontu did was for naught. Like, they did all that for nothing. But I
Yes.
think what your book does really well is it makes all of that still feel worth fighting for.
Yes.
And I as I was going through this book, I kept thinking of like Samwise Gamgee in the Lord of the Rings, like they're still good in the world, Mr. Frodo, and like I just felt that way every time I was reading Ziri and Fontu. Like they recognize they're still good,
Yeah.
and that it is worth fighting for, despite like all the odds being stacked against them at
Yeah.
every point.
Yep, which is why I'm so glad that they did put that quote on the back of the book because it is meaningful for so much more aside from the Battle of Dalna, right? Um, it's meaningful in life. It's meaningful in partnerships. It's meaningful, when it comes to international relations and intergalactic relations. So yeah, that was it. I'm glad they put that quote on there. But yeah, I'm working with Ziri and Fontu and making sure that they could see that it is the theme that never goes away in Star Wars. Hope.
Speaking of the back of the book, that quote is from the legendary Yaddle, and I remember at New York Comic Con when you mentioned you would explore Yaddle in Cataclysm, there was like audible gasps everywhere in the room. It was like the world stood still. It was like, oh my god,
Yeah.
Yaddle. We got to see Yaddle in Tales of the Jedi. Regrettably in some ways because it was a little bit tragic, but getting to
Yeah.
go back to her prime in some ways. Like, what was it like to write that character? Like, we haven't really gotten to know much about her, and you got to flesh out her personality. And she's watching this youngling Sippa, which is another element to her story. Like, how did it feel to take on the reins?
It felt wonderful. And I originally, I conceived of putting her in Master Yaddle, like in the story not as a main character, but just sort of like kind of showed up here and then sort of showed up there, and that was kind of it. And the sort of feedback I got from the powers that be were like more Yaddle. It was like a simple sentence, like more Yaddle, and I was like, really, really, because I wanted to put more in, but I wasn't sure if I was like, okay, excellent, I'm totally going for this. So I sort of rewrote her storyline and was able to make her a main character that you get to follow throughout the story with her and Sippa. And Sippa Tarko, she was also difficult to write as a character and making sure that she wasn't just there for laughs or she wasn't just there for like just to be snarky, a little snarky kid here and there. It was a journey for everybody, and so that's the difficult thing is making sure that people change from the beginning of the book to the end, but in a way that feels um, challenging for them, not obvious, and also satisfying in some ways. In some cases, not satisfying, depending on the character, the situation. But yeah, so writing Yaddle coming back to Yaddle was, I don't know. It was just this like, I can't really quite put words to it. But when I knew I was going to write about her, I just got this sort of warm feeling, this warm green feeling. I was just like, I just sort of felt like I knew her voice. I sort of felt I immediately knew how she would react to things. I knew she would have maybe a sense of humor. I knew that she was also a master Jedi, which meant that she was working on a level that was different than so many different people on the page. And I had to respect that. And there's three of her species in the Star Wars universe. Period. That's it. I had to be careful with her, and I wrote her with a huge amount of respect. So hopefully people will enjoy her adventure in this book. I just was so tickled that I was able to write about her, and it came out the way it did. So it was just awesome. Awesome all the time.
I love that the note was not like, oh, you got to scrap the whole thing, but instead, more Yaddle.
Yes.
I feel like there's
Yeah.
no better feeling than like, oh, I get to explore this
Yeah.
more. You're
2
gonna
words. I know.
let me do it.
It might have to turn into a tattoo, more Yaddle. People
I support it.
I mean, they have tattoo stations at Celebration. It's not too late to book an appointment, I'm sure. Do you want
Wait,
to
for
get the
real,
Yaddle
they are?
They do have tattoos.
There's like a whole
Yeah.
tattoo pavilion sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds extremely, extremely dangerous in a good way.
Just kidding. We
Oh,
never said
man.
anything.
Had one too many blue milks during the High Republic panel. I'm gonna go get an Elzar Man tattoo next week.
That's right. That's not a
Yeah.
bad thing. Do it.
I would love to see it. Anyway, that's a whole other, like, if it happens, we'll do a podcast on it. But kind of like to get a little serious and wrap things up again here. After this whole story, and listeners, I am going to allude to the final parts of the book. So just FYI, listener, the final lines of the book kind of signal a hopefulness and a new start. And I'm wondering what you hope readers walk away with from this story and the arc that these characters went on.
Oh gosh. Boy, you know how to end on a really, really intense question. What do I hope that readers will take away from this? I hope that this will be like, some of the earliest stuff in this galaxy, in the sandbox. And I hope people realize that there are certain elements of Star Wars that never ever go away, and that they are just immutable, and they will exist in every single book that you find, and that these books are no different. I hope that you also see that the Republic was once very young, and the Jedi Order, during the High Republic, when it's at its height, also was figuring things out. And I think that was a really interesting thing to look at, and that is what's different from everything else that's ever been written. Is the status of the galaxy is quite different back then. And if you want to know what it was like way back when, you can go through phase 2 and sort of get this feeling for a different time and place, but also still know that you are in familiar territory. So yeah, like let's remember never to forget some of the same themes of the good versus evil, never giving up hope, trust in the Force. Those things last forever in this universe, no matter how far back you go.
Definitely. That's beautifully put. And I don't know if you have a couple extra minutes. We have like some quick rapid fire questions here for you, just to
Okay.
end on. Some fun questions, just not
No
a
wrong
test, no
answers.
quizzes, no wrong answers.
Okay.
Seriously.
But first off, I think you might have alluded to it. Do you have a favorite Star Wars film?
Oh yeah, Empire Strikes Back is always my favorite. It's but I like a lot of them, and very, very much so. But I Empire Strikes Back is probably my favorite. It just has everything. Everything is just perfection in that movie. I love it.
Absolutely. I don't think there's anyone out here denying that. It's a quality movie. Who is your favorite Star Wars character?
Oh God, it's really hard to say one. So I guess if I'm going to some of the originals, to the original 3 movies, to 4, 5, and 6 that I grew up with, When I was a kid, it was Leia because I would pretend to be Leia on the playground. We were all fighting to be Leia. Sometimes I didn't get to be her, but that was very sad. But I think that throughout everything, across so many different platforms and media and stuff like that, I think Obi-Wan is maybe one of my favorites because you see such a big arc. You get to really get to know him on so many places. Um, yeah. And if I were to say more recently, I'm a huge gushing fan of Cassian Andor, like huge fan. Like I just I just am so I like, can it come out sooner? Can the next season come out any sooner? I'm so excited. I just love it so much.
I remember watching Rogue One and being like, where's the book? Where's the book?
You
And
know,
now that we have the show, it's like better than I could have ever imagined.
it's funny because when I watched Rogue One, I found it very upsetting.
Mm.
So sad. And when and it took me a while to realize how fantastically awesome Cassian was. But I did the same thing when it came to like Loki. Like I remember being like, I understand why everybody's into Loki. And then I like watched Thor like 2 more times. And then all of a sudden I was just sort of like deeply attracted to him. And I was like, I get it now. But sometimes it takes me a couple like shots to realize how fantastic somebody is because the first time it just sort of kind of happens fast. And I think I was just so upset by the end of Rogue One and it was too difficult for me to like want to watch it again. But now I'm sort of like, I get it. I deeply get it. Like, yeah, huge fan of the writing that Tony Gilroy's doing and what's happening in Andor is just fantastic.
I love in your acknowledgments, you said when the Lucasfilm logo appears on the screen when I'm watching Andor, my heart does a little disco dance. And I texted Sarah as soon as I read that, I go, she's one of us.
On the
Lydia's
joy.
one of us.
I absolutely mean that. I'm sort of like, it is a weird thing. Like I'm sort of behind the curtain now, you know, I don't get to see everything that happens, but I get to see a lot and I'm allowed back here. And it is just, it's such an honor and it's such a pleasure. And I still pinch myself because I'm kind of like, you know, maybe if I've written more stuff in Star Wars, I'll become a little bit more kind of like, yeah, I'm used to being here, but I'm still very fresh and green and like a lot of squealing that's going to be happening next when I'm in London. So
yes.
yeah, if you like poke me, I will probably squeal with happiness. So just know that could happen.
Yeah.
The good thing about Star Wars is, you know, no matter how long it's been in your life, no matter how old you are, how long, you know, like Star Wars has been around, there is that sense of genuine wonder and joy that you can find in it, even with the most morally ambiguous characters or the most complicated storylines. The wonder is there because it's baked into the world.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Star Wars is like, has everything good in it, has all the good things you need for the absolute perfect escape. Like everything. It's got the humor, it's got the good, it's got the bad, it's got the struggle, it's got some romance, you know, it's just got everything. It's perfect.
Speaking of the book or the series having everything, our perhaps silliest, you know, rapid fire question we could ask is if you could take any character from your book and introduce them to any other character in the Star Wars franchise and have them have a conversation or be best friends or enemies, who would you choose? Which two characters and why?
Oh, that's a really hard question. So for reasons, I would pick Ada Forte. And I would have her, who would I have her meet? I would want her to meet somebody who doesn't know how to be a Jedi yet. So I would have her meet Rey early on in the movies and be like, this is what it can be like, you know? I would love for Ada to have that conversation with somebody who was struggling and show all that bounteous warmth and energy and also like, you know, knowledge and wisdom and impart that on somebody who was looking to find their way.
It's an excellent answer. So I love
such
that.
a good answer. Now I'm thinking about it.
I love that, you know.
Thank you. Oh yeah.
And finally here, our last question, one to wrap it up. What does Star Wars mean to you? Like whether it's personally, professionally, if you could just kind of sum it up and like how it makes you feel at the end of the day, like what would your answer be?
You know what? Probably because of the way it was saying such a part of my growing up and stuff like that. Like it, I don't want to say it feels like family, but it feels like this sort of essential part of the culture that I live in. It's not just Korean culture and it's not just medical culture and stuff like that, but like Star Wars culture is like always been in the background of my life. Maybe not as intensely as some people in the fandom, and I absolutely bow to how much people know about what's in this galaxy, but it has meant something important to me, and so it feels that much more special that I've been invited into this magical world. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Well, we are also thankful that you've been invited into the Star Wars galaxy. We hope it's not your last Star Wars book for sure. I think that will be felt by many other fans and readers of the High Republic when Cataclysm is out on shelves. So,
Thank
Lydia,
you.
we appreciate your time today on the podcast. It was honestly such a pleasure to chat with you and celebrate the book's release. Where can our listeners find you online? And is there any other work that you have coming up that you can talk about that you would like us to be aware of?
Oh, so I am on Twitter, Lydia Y. Kang. I am on Instagram at Lydia Kang, and you can usually find events lists and book stuff on my website, lydiakang.com. I am in the process of writing like a bunch of different things, but I do have a nonfiction book that's coming out as a follow-up to Patient Zero and Quackery, and it's on the topic of pseudoscience, where Nate Peterson and I get to talk about things like flat Earth and don't hate me, astrology, and a lot of other things that we are going to sort of talk about and why we put so much faith in them. So it's going to be a fun book. I don't know exactly when it's coming out, probably sometime in 2024, but that's what I'm working on right now.
That's exciting. Yeah,
I'm here for it.
I love that.
Yeah. And then future Star Wars related stuff, can't talk about it, but something will be revealed at some point in time. And I'm just going to leave it vague like that.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well,
We love
keep your eyes
vague
out on
Star Wars.
Just like
Keeping it vague.
keeping it in the galaxy.
Yeah.
It's just we'll get to that hyperspace. I don't know. I'm trying to connect it. It's not happening, but I'm trying. But yeah, no, we'll definitely keeping an eye on socials all the time because we live on the internet, and yeah, we look forward to it. So
Awesome.
So yeah,
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. It was fun.
absolutely.
Loved it.
Thank you again. And we hope you have a great time at your first celebration.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And remember, if you poke me, I will squeal with happiness. So just poke me too hard. All right. Thank you guys so much for having me. I had a great time.
Of course. And may the force be with you.
And may the force be with you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to our interview with Lydia Kang. And a huge thank you to Del Rey for making it happen and also sending us a review copy of the book. As we mentioned up front, Cataclysm is now out. We will have a book discussion up sometime in the coming weeks after Celebration. Not one you're going to want to miss because we are going to go through our emotions with it quite heavily. And it is such a wonderful book, and we have a lot to say. And in the meantime, until our next discussions on Phase 2 of the High Republic, you can find us on all of our socials, including Twitter and Instagram, where we're shouting all of our opinions into the void. Hopefully some of them are good. Probably most of them are bad, but still, you can follow us on those platforms. And please follow us wherever you're listening to the show, because we love books here. And if you love books, you should be following us and listen to all the good things. We got lots of other interviews with authors in the past. Great stuff here on the channel. So make sure you're following us and drop a review if you enjoyed this episode.
yes, and if you have listened to this episode, but you haven't listened to our episode on Convergence with Zoraida Cordova, go do that next. But seriously, thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our conversation with Lydia Kang. We are so grateful that you are here. And an extra special thank you to our patrons who help make this show happen every single week. And even the weeks we don't have a podcast out. Seriously. Thank you to Ben, Brian, Cheryl, Clay, Deborah, Dylan, D. Sizzle, Emma, Huang, Jennifer, Knights of Ren, Katie, Leanne, Levi, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Rob, Saber Bouquet, Santa, Sky Talker, Stephen, Tom, and Travis. We are grateful for all of you. And again, for everybody who's taken the time out of their day. Hope you're having a good one.
Yes, absolutely. And if you are listening to this before Celebration, there will be a High Republic panel this Saturday. So make sure you're checking out our Twitter there for all of the updates on phase 2 and on phase 3, baby. So you're going to want to check those out.
I live in fear, just like the Jedi. You're like, Sarah, stop
Just
interrupting.
like
And I'm like, no, fear, like the Jedi.
What do the Jedi fear? What do we fear is the question. But we will find out this Saturday. So thank you, everybody, once again. And until next time, may the Force be with you always.